Hello, I'm John Walter, instructor for English 302, section M01 and M03, and in this lecture we're going to take a look at chapter 17, the first part of chapter 17 of The Craft of Research, which is a chapter on revising style. Booth Collins Williams' goal for chapter 17, revising style, telling your story clearly, is to help us understand why we might believe a piece of writing is clear, awkward, dense, or direct, and to identify the causes that lead us to feel that writing is clear, awkward, dense, or direct. More importantly, they want us to be able to identify the specific features that lead us to think of a piece of writing in those ways, so that we can diagnose problems in our own writing and revise it so that our writing is more clear. Clear writing, they tell us, is often a matter of getting the first 6 or 7 words and the last 4 or 5 words of a sentence right. In this lecture, in focusing on section 17.2, pages 252 to 260, we're going to concern ourselves with the first 6 or 7 words of a sentence and leave the last 4 or 5 words to later lectures. A key concept for this chapter is the idea of telling a story. And as with every story, there are characters, the doers who act, and there are actions. Generally, readers expect actors to be the subject of a sentence and actions to be the verb. While we can violate these expectations for rhetorical effect, we need to be careful, as it is easy for such constructions to become convoluted and confusing. Consider, for example, this familiar story. Once upon a time, as a walk through the woods was being conducted by Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf's jump out from behind a tree happened, causing her fright. A walk through the woods was being conducted? The wolf's jump out from behind a tree happened? No wonder she was terrified. Compare that telling to this one. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the woods when a wolf jumped out from behind a tree and frightened her. If you're like most people, you're going to find this second one here more clear, more direct, more straightforward. You're going to find this one just more awkward, dense, indirect. So, let's take a look why. Let's figure out why. What I've done, we're going to take a look at these two little synopses of the story again. This time, the subjects are going to be marked in blue, and the verbs are going to be marked in red. Note in which version we have an actor, who is the subject, and a verb, and an action that works as our verb. Once upon a time, as a walk through the woods was being conducted by Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf's jump out from behind the tree happened, causing her fright. Okay, so our subjects are in blue, our verbs are in red. What's the subject here? Walk. That's actually our simple subject. A walk through the woods is the full subject there. How do we know it's a subject? Well, because the verb is what was being conducted. What was being conducted? A walk was being conducted. So, the walk is our subject. And what we're looking for here is, is our subject an actor, a person or thing doing something? No. Is our verb an action verb? Was being conducted? Kind of, maybe not really the strongest action verb one could come up with. Was being conducted, something's being conducted, so there's a little bit of action there. Let's take a look at this other part. The wolf's jump out from behind the tree happened, causing her fright. So, our verbs here, happened and causing. They're in red. We know what happened? The jump. What was causing the jump? So, is the jump the subject? Is this an actor? Is this a person or thing acting? No, it's a jump. Let's take a look here at this second one. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the woods when a wolf jumped out from behind a tree and frightened her. Okay, so our subject in blue, Little Red Riding Hood, think is our subject. The verb was walking. Who was walking? Little Red Riding Hood. We have an actor, a person or thing doing, who is the subject, was walking is the verb. That's an action verb. When a wolf jumped out from behind a tree and frightened her. Verbs: jumped and frightened. Who jumped? The wolf. Who frightened her? The wolf. The wolf is our subject, and the wolf is an actor. Jumped and frightened. Very straightforward action verbs. So this example here was actually taken from Joseph Williams' style, 10 Lessons in Clarity and Grace. I just want to point this out since I borrowed it. You might note that Joseph Williams is one of the 3 authors of our book, The Craft of Research. His book, Style, 10 Lessons in Clarity and Grace, is sort of, basically, chapter 17 of The Craft of Research is a synopsis of, kind of like, hits some of the highlights of Williams' book on style. And if chapter 17 seems really interesting to you, really useful to you, you might want to pick up Style, the book, 10 Lessons in Clarity and Grace. What I took there was from 7th edition. I believe it's up to at least the 11th edition now. Really, the 11th edition, or the most current edition, is really expensive, as a lot of textbooks. It's upwards, I think, like $50, $60, something like that. You can buy earlier editions for just a couple dollars, and for most, for most people's purposes, most of the earlier editions, even the first edition, 3rd, 5th edition, you can get for just a few dollars. It's going to be sufficient for your needs and way less expensive. So, having said that, let's continue on taking a look at our chapter. There's obviously more in this chapter, in chapter 17, than what I've covered here. But the main idea here, from our section we've looked at, from section 17.2, is that you want to use your actors as your subjects and actions as your verbs. Some other important principles they cover, though, if you're going to use, using abstract nouns as verbs can cause the use of excessive nominalization. It's sort of that the construction of using an abstract noun as a verb often leads to excessive nominalizations. They talk about nominalization in the chapter, this section. Nominalizations are when we take a verb or an adjective and we turn it into a noun. One of the things that makes writing seem very dense, very unclear, awkward, is when we have excessive nominalization. So, as they say, there are times when you want to use an abstract noun as a verb, and that's okay. You can do it as a rhetorical choice, but if you do so, you want to make sure that you avoid excessive nominalization in the rest of your sentence. Likewise, while we like to have, we generally find it so much more straightforward if we actually have an actor, a person or thing who is doing an action, sort of a concrete, specific thing, the wolf, Little Red Riding Hood, as our subject. You can use an abstract noun as a subject. However, if you do use an abstract noun as a subject, you want to avoid using excessive abstract nouns elsewhere in the sentence. Too many abstract nouns start making the writing seem sort of unclear, imprecise, and dense. And so recognize that the excessive use of nominalizations and the excessive use of abstract nouns both lead to problems with writing. Lead to writing being more unclear, more dense, more difficult to follow. And things that lead towards excessive nominalization is the use of abstract nouns as verbs, and things that can often lead to just excessive abstraction throughout a sentence is if you actually use an abstract noun as your subject. So those are some things to recognize. Doesn't mean you have to avoid them, but recognize how they can lead to problems. And if you find those problems happening, you can know what you need to do to fix that. So, in the chapter, they offer a quick way to diagnose whether or not a sentence may need to be revised for the reasons we've looked at in section 17.2. What you can do is underline the first 6 or 7 words of every clause, not every sentence, but every clause. So every dependent clause in a sentence, independent clause in a sentence, and ask yourself 2 questions. In those first 6 or 7 words you've underlined, do you find a concrete subject rather than an abstraction? And in those 6 or 7 words, do you find a verb that is an action, a specific action, rather than a general one like make, do, have, be, etc.? If the answer is yes, you have a concrete subject, and that yes, you have a specific action, your sentence is probably okay, or at least your sentence is going to be fairly clear. If the answer is no, that you do have these abstractions as your subject, or that you do have more general verbs as your action, you may want to go back and revise. Let's apply this. Let's take a look at this here. Once upon a time, this is the one that is more straightforward. Once upon a time, Little Red Riding Hood was walking through the woods. So the first thing you can do is like these little introductory phrases, once upon a time, and they'll actually explain this a little bit later in the chapter. You can ignore those. So when you're underlining the first 6 or 7 words, something like once upon a time, or yesterday, or whatever, like kind of those little introductory phrases, you can just drop those out and start underlining after that introductory phrase. So we underline the first 6 or 7 words. We have Little Red Riding Hood was walking. That's the first 6 words. What do we have there? We have an actual concrete subject, Little Red Riding Hood. We have was walking, an active, an action, a straightforward action. The sentence is good. Or the clause is good. So let's take a look at our second clause. When a wolf jumped out from behind the tree and frightened her. So, when a wolf jumped out from behind. That's our first 7 words, I think. Do we have our concrete subject? Yes, wolf. Do we have an action as a verb? Jumped. Yes. Huzzah! We have a good sentence here based on that sort of diagnosis. There could be other problems, but this, seems to be good. Let's take a look at our problematic version, though. So we drop out once upon a time again. So we have as a walk through the woods was being conducted. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So as a walk through the woods was being, so as a walk, that's 3, through the woods, that's 6, was. We get to was, we're at 7 words. Do we have a concrete subject? No. Our subject is walk. And our full, that's our simple subject. Our full subject is as a walk through the woods. Do we have an action verb? Was being conducted. That's not really an action verb, but actually, the 7th word is was. So we just have was, which is a really sort of, again, the verb to be. It's a very general verb. As I say here, if you've got a general verb, including the verb to be, you might want to revise. So we don't have a concrete subject. We have was, but actually the full is being conducted. But was is at the word 7. So by this method for diagnosing, we may have a problem. This clause may be problematic. Let's take a look at the next clause. The wolf's jump out from behind a tree happened, causing a fright. So that's our second clause. So we underline the wolf's jump, that's 3, out from behind a, that's 7 words. So we do that, we have, do we have a concrete subject? No, we have a jump as our subject. Do we have a verb? The wolf's jump out from behind a, we're at 7 words there? No, there's no verb at all. The verb happened, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th, the 9th word. Okay, so this clause, we don't have a concrete subject, and we don't get to a verb until word 9. We may have a problem with this clause as well. So this entire sentence has 2 clauses, and both clauses seem to have problems. So you can see this tool for sort of diagnosing whether a sentence might have a problem works for our 2 examples. For the problematic one, both clauses, the little diagnostic tool suggests that both clauses may be problematic. And for our version of the story that seems straightforward, works well, our diagnostic tool suggests that the story, both clauses actually don't seem to have a problem. So you can see how that tool sort of actually works. That's how you can apply it. Okay, so that really is the lecture here. If you have questions, this is the most complex part of this chapter, is this section 17.2, and there's some stuff I really haven't delved into too deeply here in this lecture. There's questions about nominalization, the questions about what can be subjects. As they note, you can actually have abstractions as a subject, as a character, abstract nouns, but you want to be careful with them. If you have questions about any of this, again, We have the discussion forum for general questions. You can ask there. We also, I'm asking you to sort of work with, you can talk about this chapter as part of your weekly discussion for this week. If you want to, you can, rather, if you have questions you want to bring up, rather than ask you to pick, I think, identify 5 things you want to talk about. But if one of those things you want to talk about is actually a question, please bring it up, ask, and we can, see if we can get some discussion and people fill in some things. Okay, thank you.